Well, hello and welcome to this session of ExecuNet Masterclass. I'm your host, as always, Tony Vlahos, and my guest this hour is an acclaimed advisor to CEOs, senior leaders, and teams. He's also an amazing author, and his name is Doug Sundheim. So, what are the leadership skills and capacities that business leaders need in order to rise to the challenges of the coming decade? That's a really big question. And today, Doug will give us some guidance to help ensure both personal and organizational success. Really important stuff, and a part of our daily commitment here at ExecuNet to connect you with trusted voices, people like Doug, who can show you how to pivot to your best career and work and be the kind of leader you want to be. Well, I am delighted to introduce today's guest. Doug Sundheim is an executive advisor, a consultant, and coach with over 25 years of experience in growing businesses and helping others do the same. He works with leaders and teams of Fortune 500 companies and entrepreneurial firms to help them maximize their effectiveness. He is a frequent speaker on a variety of business topics like leadership, organizational culture, and strategy. He delivers talks at Columbia University, NYU, Society for Human Resources, and the World Research Group Conference, among others. He is no stranger to the firing line of business. Fun fact, he started a 100-person catering company in his early 20s, followed by several years in the marketing consulting field, where his clients included Sony, M&M Mars, Mattel, Motorola, among others. These days, his clients include Amex, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, the US Federal Reserve System, among many more. With that brief intro, welcome, Doug, to the ExecuNet stage. They are all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Kim. And I'm so glad to be here with everyone. And I'm someone who often thrives off of seeing people in person. So the best we can do is create some interaction with some chat. So please, if anything comes up that you want further information on or want to ask about, please feel free to enter in the chat, get the question in, and we're going to leave some time at the end to talk a little bit about anything that's come up. So the topic is the coming decade, leading without easy answers. It is something that is on everyone's mind that I'm talking to, all my executive clients, executive teams, people looking for jobs. It is, I think, it is kind of most easily characterized as a shifting ground underneath us right now. So what I want to talk about today is that's not going to go away. The change is the constant now. So who do we need to be as leaders? And whether you're sitting in role as a leader right now, or you are looking for jobs and talking about your leadership skills and capabilities and focus, some of these topics that we'll talk about today will hopefully help you in either of those situations. So we don't have a ton of time, 45 minutes. So I want to dive right in. This is kind of some new content. So I wrote a book about 7 years ago about risk taking. So I've talked a lot about risk taking, and this is kind of an evolution of some of that content given the world we find ourselves in right now. So I want to talk a little bit about that. First, right out of the gates, I want to share a quick quote. I always like to figure out exactly where quotes came from. I could never figure out where Peter Drucker said this, so I only say attributed to, but everyone says he said it. I always loved it. There's a point of complexity beyond which a business is no longer manageable. That he was saying it about an individual business, but I think right now, these days, we could almost feel business there is, in general, business can almost feel so complex that it's not manageable. I would say we're not at that point, but it certainly can start to feel like that for many of us. A lot of different reasons why that's happening right now. Here's five I hear all the time, I talk about. There's the complexity of technological change. Don't have to go into too much detail there. I think everyone on the call is well aware of that. Not only is it complex, but it's happening very quickly. So even the complex stuff, maybe we thought we could process in years past, times it doesn't even feel like we can process it now because it's coming at us, hitting us so quickly. There's all the things around what's called ESG. You may have heard about this. You may be dealing with it in your business, environmental, social, and governance concerns. Governance being some of the stuff around stakeholder and shareholder debate that's kind of raging in the media these days. Juggling some of those stakeholder needs, customers, employees, broader public. we have to remember they're all dealing with the same forces and changes that we are. So how we engage with all of our stakeholders is also, there's a lot of new and different things we have to do. And then obviously over the last year, COVID-19, hybrid work, I think everyone, whether you're coming back into the office right now or you're not, some version of hybrid work is here to stay. And so we're all pretty aware of that. And so leaders have to find a way forward amidst this complexity. So question, what do I do? Here's the answer. There are no easy answers. I say ironically, that's the answer because as we start to wrap our heads around this idea that the answers aren't easy anymore, they're not going to be things that we can kind of find and just depend on, but rather it's this evolving evolution of answers ongoingly, we can get to be a little bit more comfortable. What I wanted to talk about today are 4 topics that I'm seeing a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of, I'm talking about with my clients a lot, that are critical in a world where you don't have easy answers, but you still have to lead. So what we'll go through today is process in and of itself is more useful than the answers. So if you have the process, you can find the answers even as they change. The foundational importance of clarifying values, we'll talk a little bit about that. The need to cultivate what I call a paradox mindset, which is holding 2 truths at the same time that maybe are in conflict with each other or seemingly in conflict with each other. And then the value of leading as a team. This last one, we'll talk a little bit about this idea that, if there was ever a time when a leader could kind of stand up, have the answers, and heroically lead an organization to the future, which it's debatable if that ever existed. But if it did, that's many years in the past. Right now, the ability to really get the most out of a group, to be able to know that you're not the one who has all the answers, but you can together find them, is obviously a critical skill set, something I'm seeing more and more of these days. In fact, the whole concept of team coaching over the last decade, as distinct from executive coaching, has gotten a lot of traction. So let's dig right in and talk a little bit about process. Process is more useful than answers. I'm sure everyone on this call, in some way, shape, or form, has been involved in defining process for your organization, has had to live inside of process. Some of the process has been good, some hasn't. And when they work, it's very helpful in being able to deliver value for team members, for yourself, for your customers, for all your stakeholders. Great quote from one of the fathers of organizational consulting and general business consulting. You've probably heard the Deming Awards. If you can't describe what you are doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So it's a big topic. Obviously, there's all sorts of processes in organizations. There's operational processes, there's teaming processes. So I won't go through all of those, but I just want to bring up a few things that I'm seeing, hearing, talking about a lot with my clients these days. For the most part, I think you'd be hard pressed to find any executive that would say process is not important. So most of us do know it's important. One of the places where a lot of executives get tripped up is getting in the habit of skipping processes when we think we know the right answer. You look at a set of things going on, you feel the pressure of the market, you feel the pressure of speed to get something out. You can skip the right dialogue process or the right process of quality control or whatever it is. And we've probably all been there. I think if we were all on this call being honest, we know a time where we did it. And more often than not, in my experience, it backfires. So going slow to go fast, even if it means taking a little bit extra time, following the process, making sure voices are in the room, is really important now, especially at a moment where things seem to be changing and moving so quickly. So second bullet gets at that. More complex things get, the more critical, clear processes become. I also like to make this point, this third one with my clients as well. Process should guide, never prescribe behavior. So it should be guidelines. I always say, not too tight, not too loose. If a process is too tight and very prescriptive, people feel hemmed in. They don't feel like they have the ability to really operate and bring out the best in themselves. If it's too loose, people don't have the direction. So every organization, every team should really do the work to figure out how do we get not too tight, not too loose. Goals. This is similar to the first point. It's one of those things we all know, but sometimes don't do. Really, when we sit down to drive anything forward together as a group, what are our goals? Just simply asking the question, what are we trying to get out of this meeting? What are we trying to get out of this project? What are we trying to get out of this program, this broader organizational goal? We all know it's important, and we probably don't have those conversations enough. Teeing those up, having them, getting aligned is really critical. Let me just share one point about alignment there. In a world where things are moving so quick and there's so much changing, the chances that you're going to be able to find something that an entire executive team agrees on is very slim. And so I often talk with my clients this distinction between agreement and alignment. Agreement is we all agree that this is the first choice. Alignment is some of us think it's a first choice, some of us have a different first choice, but we get to a point where we're all going to support this as if it were our first choice so that we can have a aligned point of view in the organization. A really critical distinction, alignment and agreement. It's one of the big topics I end up working with leadership teams on. A good process leaves room for all voices, and similar, connected to that, a good process leaves room for dialogue. I want to talk a little bit about this last point, dialogue. Again, this is the topic that comes up and I work with leadership teams on quite a bit. And I want to just share with you a framework that I often use. I don't want to go too heavily into it. It's somewhat self-explanatory, but I want to just make a couple of points about it that you'll see on the left side, this idea that here are the places where we are not productive. And on the right side, you can see places where we are productive. It's really important to note that all of us can be anywhere on this continuum at any point in time. So there will be times where we get really productive. We suspend our assumptions so we can really listen, and we're really respectful of a variety of different voices in the room, and we can inquire, and we're really on our game. We've probably all been there. And then there's the time where some people in the room that are kind of challenging, and you didn't get a lot of sleep, and there's way too much going on, and we can slip to that left side of these continuum, right? We get to attach to a point of view. We maybe keep our thoughts to ourselves. We don't know how they're going to be perceived. We don't really press and dig into other people's thinking. We jump to conclusions. So the best way to look at this is it's a continuum we're constantly on. And in a world that's constantly changing, in a world where we don't have easy answers, we need to do our best to make sure that we are moving towards that right side. Some people do things like meditating. Some people do things like getting themselves centered for 10, 15 minutes before they go into a big meeting. So the question is, what are the things you need to do in order to ensure you're moving to that right side of the equation? Something I talk about when I talk about this idea of productive dialogue is that if you're a leader, you are driving results, you're driving outcomes. And we often think of outcomes as the business result, but I often say that any good leader has to be thinking about 3 simultaneous outcomes at the same time. So the first is that task outcome. What am I charged from a organizational point to deliver, say, for customers? And maybe an internal and external customer. So it's the task, it's what we talk about as our work. But the second outcome every interaction has is the relationship outcome. So there are times when we may deliver on the task, but we actually damage relationships in the process. And we know that's not sustainable long term. And then the third outcome is the learning outcome. So we've done something, it's had an impact on relationships. What have we learned? And we know as leaders that if we're focused only on the task outcome, deliver, 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 we're taking our eyes off of the relationship outcome. We're taking our eyes off of the learning outcomes. We don't have a sustainable solution for the future. And I always say that task, relationship, learning outcomes are like 3 legs of a stool. You take your eye off one for too long, the organization, the project's going to fall over, the entire department can fall over, your whole organization can fall over. Task, learning, relationship outcomes. Great dialogue processes help ensure you're able to keep that stool up. Okay, so that's not working. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So two, I want to move into this topic of the foundational importance of clarifying values. We've all heard of values. We've done values work maybe ourselves. We've been in organizations that have values. I don't really walk into many organizations these days who've not somehow articulated a set of values. That said, if you don't keep values top of mind through regular discussion and action, they will always devolve into empty words on a page. This is something, as you can say, I've quoted myself here, that I say to my clients all the time. And a lot of times values, let's start at the organizational level. A lot of times values are things that there was a really thoughtful process to generate them in the beginning. It might have been 5, 10, 15 years ago in some organizations. Those values are not alive for newer people. They might not even be alive for some of the people who set them. So I always recommend once a year, figure out a process to check in on those values. Why do they exist? How do we come up with them? Is there anything that changed, shifted? Tell stories about the values. If you're a leader and you're doing town halls, talk about the values, weave them in, connect them to current projects. Talk about how current projects are actually an embodiment of our values. You got to figure out ways to kind of keep them alive. It's so important for a few different reasons. Values are going to guide a group through tough decision making. Nowadays, you're going to reach a point where you're going to see 3 good options to go forward with, and they're all going to have different pros and cons. And it's going to be hard to referee how do we move forward, especially if you're in a group where it's tough getting, let's say, 7 or 10 people aligned. A lot of times going back to the values to really figure out what is it in these decisions we're making that's going to forward what we have as values. I say values here, it can also be a mission that you have, which ties closely to values. Connected to that, it's a touchstone when things go off course. And that process that I talked about, the third bullet, this idea of checking in on them regularly, it's actually a pretty invigorating and inspiring process. Reconnects people to why they're working at the organization. It reconnects people to what's important to them. It sometimes reconnects individuals to each other, where they see really a place of alignment that they'd maybe forgotten about or didn't know because it's a newer employee. And the last, it can really help in a job search and interviewing. So for those of you that are on the call who are looking around for new jobs, one of the things that can be really valuable in this topsy-turvy world that we're living in is to either, whether you're asked about it directly or whether you have an opportunity to go there yourself, to talk about how your own values, how they connect to organizational values, and how you use those to drive results and how you have used those to drive results in the past. So just to kind of so I'm talking a lot about organizational values here, but individual values are an important foundation of team values. So when I do work, sometimes with a team, we're doing team values. When I do with an individual, we may be doing individual values. Either way, one of the great ways to get at values, and if you haven't done values work or you want to get more into it, there's a lot of great different processes out there of value sorts and sorting different values. And I've got a few of them that I use. One of my favorite, though, is telling value stories. So we are social animals who relate to each other best through stories, and stopping to really think about different stories we can tell ourselves, different individuals, our teams, can help us understand what we value. Two of the stories that I often ask clients to tell me that I and the client together then mine for their values are, tell me about a time in your life when you felt most alive. And it really can pull you back to the things that engage you, that inspire you. And when you start doing that, you start to reconnect with what's really important. Another one that I ask is, tell me about some values that you have to honor or you feel like a part of you dies a little bit. It's a little dramatic, feels like a part of you dies. But I think for all of us, that is kind of the case. And we've probably been in organizations where we don't really align with the values. where we feel like the things we value, maybe it's hard to bring them out for some reason. And it can feel a little bit suffocating to be a part of that. So whether you're in that situation or you're not, knowing that, understanding that is really helpful in guiding you forward. So we could talk for hours on values. It's always helpful to go out and find some exercises and ways to clarify values. Really important to do in this time of tremendous change. Number 3, the need to cultivate a paradox mindset. So what I would say paradox mindset is probably one of the foundational framings and models that I use when I work with clients. We all know that the simple answer of you got to look short term isn't right. But if we say you just got to look long term, that's not right either. You've got to be able to hold both a short term mindset and a long term one at the same time. And that's this idea. And there's multiple. I'll go through 5 or 6 of these paradoxes that I'm seeing quite a bit. This may give those of you on the call who are looking for a job maybe a way to talk about what it takes to lead now. For those of you sitting in role, it's a great set of conversations to have with your team when there is conflict and friction. Because paradoxes in organizations, some people call them polarities, some people call them tensions, are really where the biggest conflict can arise in an organization. So there's a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald that I like. The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So that's the paradox mindset. And I would argue that the test of first-rate leadership is really the same, the ability to hold 2 opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. So first-rate leadership sees the value of both sides of these paradoxes in different conditions. Here's some common examples. I just went through one, short-term and long-term. I think we're hearing, especially given the environmental, social, and governance concerns about sustainability. You know, you're not able to, if you were ever able to kind of lead for the short term, lead for the quarterly results, just deliver your numbers on a quarter-to-quarter basis, get them to Wall Street or whoever you need to get them to if you're a private firm. And if you do that Q1 and then Q2 and Q3, there was this assumption it's all going to work out. That's a bit of an overstatement, but there was some of that pervasive in business. It's getting harder and harder for a lot of reasons to do that. There's pressure from all sorts of stakeholder groups. They want to know about long-term results. Does that mean you can forego and not worry about short-term results? Of course, the answer to that is no. So it takes this paradox mindset, the ability to hold both and deliver on both. Similarly, detail and big picture. Can we focus on the details? If we take our eyes off those, sometimes we can't deliver. But if we take our eyes off the big picture, sometimes we're going in the wrong direction. Detail and big picture is one of those, and actually all of these. Sometimes individuals can hold these, and sometimes individuals aren't great at it. If any of you have done the Myers-Briggs, which at times I think can be a really helpful assessment, there's one of the continuums on Myers-Briggs is detail-oriented and big picture. It's the S and the N. So there's some of that where people are just predisposed. If you happen to be someone who's predisposed to just thinking about the big picture all the time, you got to make sure there's people on your team who are really focused on the detail. If you can jump back and forth between them yourself, that's great. But sometimes that can get really taxing and tiring to do. So holding one, making sure the other's covered off on, whether it's you or someone else, is really important. Risk aversion and risk seeking. You know, we hear a lot these days about the importance of risk taking risk. I wrote a book 7 years ago from McGraw-Hill called Taking Smart Risks. So I'm very aware of risk seeking. In that book, I talk about obviously smart risks, which is finding the balance between risk aversion and risk seeking. Are you taking smart risks? There are times where we really need to seek risk and take a bigger risk, where we need to be more risk averse and not take those. Are you having dialogues with your team to figure out where those are? Going fast, going slow, pros and cons to both of those, as we all know. Here's one that I think is becoming increasingly important, especially as the world changes and get faster and faster, which is having a knowing mentality. I know the answers. Leaders were, for the longest time, relied upon as someone who knew the answers, who had the answers. And increasingly, and I think if anyone on the call has ever been through executive coaching or any leadership trainings or leadership development processes, having that learning mentality is over the last decade, has been a big topic of conversation. So the ability to know and have conviction, and then the ability to stop and learn and admit you don't know something is really critical. There's connected to this is what I call reflection and action. If the knowing is taking action, I know what to do, and the learning is reflection. And a quote I've always loved is, reflection without action is a daydream, but action without reflection is a nightmare. So you have to really figure out how to balance both of those. Using a rational mindset, logic versus emotional, which is what's the feeling in the room. We've heard a lot about IQ and EQ over the past 20 years. Never has it been more important to be able to hold those. Specifically, because on the emotional side, I think we all would agree that you've got to have strong, rational, and logical thinking to be successful in business. On the emotional side, it's a lot of times so important now because you're dealing with the emotions of other employees who are dealing with all these same things that we're talking about. And so it can get really challenging and messy. The ability to just hold the space, be calm emotionally, and be someone who can be relied upon to be that even keel, steady in the storm is really critical. And then finally, one I see a lot is this idea of alone together. Where do we go alone? There's an expression out there I've heard quite a bit recently, which is a popular one. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So it goes back to the fast and the slow. Sometimes we have to do things alone. We know there's risks, but we do it. And then sometimes it's critical we do it together. We've got to balance those. Okay. Let me just share this one exercise. This can be a great exercise to do individually. This can be a great thing to do with your team. Write out the paradoxes that you feel you need to hold to be successful in the role, or you feel the team needs to hold to be successful. Doing it has a great ability to bring out for people why they're feeling conflict and tension, and it tees up some really interesting conversations. So what you would do is identify what you feel are your strengths and weaknesses on either side. Yeah, as a group, we're really great at moving fast, but we don't pause enough. We don't have enough, let's say, debriefs after projects or after things that we're doing. We're not learning enough. If you're doing it alone, share the list with some trusted colleagues, and then figure out where and how you want to get some of the areas for development into your own development planning. Sometimes that means actually working on it. Sometimes that means building a team that has a more well-rounded group of people. Okay. The ability to manage these tensions is one of the most valuable traits in the coming decade, as we discussed. Okay, value leading as a team. Richard Hackman is one of the foremost leaders. He's passed away a few years ago, but for 40 years, he studied probably teams more than anyone. I have no question that when you have a team, the possibility exists that it will generate magic, producing something extraordinary, but don't count on it. And I think if any of us have ever been on a part of a team, which is, I'm sure everyone on this call, this really resonates with us. Oftentimes, one of the things I talk with clients about is we probably, if we think back on every team we've ever been a part of, most of them are forgettable. There's probably a few that are memorably dysfunctional, and then probably even a smaller amount that are truly high performing. And it stands to reason, because high performing teams are really complex. I actually just wrote an article, most recent article in Forbes about this topic. And one of the things I talk about is the idea that teams are complex. There's a lot of moving parts, and they're hard to keep together for a few reasons I'll go through on the next slide. And when you think about leadership training, leadership development, it's very interesting. I was recently with an executive at a Fortune 500 financial services firm, and we went over all of the leadership development offerings at the firm. And what was interesting is, for all the individual ways, from coaching and mentoring and training and kind of broader leadership development programs to programs out of house, going to universities, for all the leadership training development, there was nothing that focused specifically on leading a team. What does it mean to lead a team? I think there's an assumption in our leadership culture that says, if you build up these competencies, whatever they are, and there's a lot of similar ones at organizations, you'll just naturally be able to lead a team. But that's not necessarily the case. And so one of the things you're seeing a lot now is organizations that are billing themselves as developing leadership team leading capability. So it's a specific, as I said, distinct discipline, team coaching from executive coaching. So let's talk a little bit about what some of those conditions are for great teams. What Richard Hackman did, starting in the 1970s with one of his PhD students back then, who's now taken over the work by the name of Ruth Wagman, was studied what are the conditions that create really effective teams. And they now have an assessment that you can take to assess that. And you'll see it's a pretty broad set of things. I want to walk through it because as you think about leading, as you think about talking about your own leadership theories and philosophies and how you approach leading or what you're doing with your team, these six conditions can be really helpful as a self-assessment if you want to kind of do the actual assessment, that as well. And it can be a great benchmarking tool to better understand, where are we leading together as a team well, and where are we struggling? So the first of the six conditions is being a real team. And in the research, what they talk about is, first of all, you're bounded, which means, it sounds funny to say this, but as I say it, you'll probably recognize why it's so important. Bounded means that the people on the team actually know they're on the team. And what you find in a lot of organizations is, if you ask someone who's on your team and you ask 10 people, the people on that team, some people might share that it's 22 people. Some people might say, oh no, it's only these 7. It's really fascinating when you go out and ask people, there's not even a clarity of the bounding, who's on the team. So obviously critically important. It sounds obvious, and yet it isn't. Interdependent. The people on the team need each other to deliver something. So they don't just come together so that they can share things and projects they're working on or give report outs. They actually have interdependent work. And the third is that it's a stable team. It doesn't change too much over time. This is a hard one. Sometimes you can have it, sometimes you can't. But the more you're able to get a really stable team over time, the more effective the team's going to be. Second, a compelling purpose. In their research, they really found that it was 3 big things made the purpose compelling. It's consequential. So the team exists to actually do something motivating, inspiring, consequential that gets them out of bed in the morning to really figure out how to overcome all these challenges of being a team. Since similar to that, it's challenging, and last, it's clear. Kind of gets to the same point as the real team. Are we clear? And boundedness, are we clear on what our purpose is? we have the right people, which means two things. We have both the right players and the right mix of people. This is an interesting assessment. What it does when you take it is it helps you understand if you've got not only not enough diversity, but too much diversity. Diversity, not just meaning gender or race or age, but kind of diversity of skill sets, diversity of points of view on different topics. Not too tight, not too loose is really important. Not too diverse, not too under diverse. Sound structure. This is kind of a big category. And what's assessed here is what are the tasks that we are asked to do? What are our norms? How do we engage with each other? If any of you are familiar with Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, that would really fall under a lot under this norms section. How do we build trust? How do we hold each other accountable? So it also serves to show you how this model is much broader than one of those just team functioning models, because this is what I call a team condition model. It's much bigger than just the norms and the function. But I would put Lencioni's model inside of just that 4 norms. And then the size of the team. 2 people is probably too small. 22 is too big. Their research says, that 7, 8 range is probably about ideal for a team. Supportive context for the team. What are the structures set up to actually ensure that the team is can be supported? What are the rewards? If we come together, we really nail it. Do we get the rewards? What informational needs do we have? Are we getting professional development and training, education? Do we have the resources that we need at our disposal? Pretty straightforward. And sometimes these things are just things and a busy team takes their eye off of. So a good leader really needs to ensure that those things are being taken care of. And this last one is this idea of team coaching. Again, I was distinguishing it. This could be done by, for example, an external coach, but it could also be done by the team leader. In some teams, it's done by someone else on the team. And what is team coaching? It's supporting the team to evolve itself. It's not telling the team what to do. It's creating a space within which the team can reflect on these first 5 things, identify gaps, and evolve themselves. So as they did their research, they came to call these 2 different groups, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6, 2 different things. So they called these the essentials. Pretty much what the research identified was if you don't have these, the chances of you being an effective team are really, really slim. You don't have much place to go. It's foundational. It's what you need to get out of the gates at all. And then these 3, they called the enablers. Once you have those, and you've gotten those in place, these are some of the levers you can really play with and constantly refine, have dialogues with the group, define together as a group to get the team more effective. Okay, so I wanted to just leave us with one quote here, and it's a little bit different than the Peter Drucker quote, which suggested that we may be getting too complex. And this one comes from Winston Churchill, and it's out of intense complexities, intense simplicities emerge. And if I were to underline just one mindset to walk away from this session with as a leader, and what your job as a leader is, it's the ability to simplify complexity. There's a couple different ways to simplify complexity. One is too quickly, where it becomes something that doesn't have seeming awareness of all the variables. And then another way is to really distill essence from a deep understanding of the complexities going on. And that latter one is the type of simplicity that we're talking about here. And as leaders, that's what your people really, as we move forward over the next decade, are going to be looking for from you. An ability to simplify complexity in a way that actually resonates and doesn't feel simplistic. So that is what I've had. I think I'm just a couple minutes early here. I wanted to take a second before we go to Q&A just to say that, so a couple different ways you can keep in touch with me. I write a very brief 30-second quick read on Substack, which is at dougsundheim.substack.com. It's notes on leading, kind of play around with some really fast ways to get quick insights. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You can check me out on my website, or you can send me an email as well. So with that, I will pause and see. It looks like a couple of chats came in. I'll pass it over back to Tony and
Right, Doug.
see what we want to talk about.
Thank you. Everyone, please check out Notes on Leading. I was sharing with Doug earlier that I read those religiously every morning. They're just a wonderful way and a part of the ritual of getting into your work that could be significant for you. I find that it's just a refreshing take on so many aspects of leadership. So check those out. So let's start with this question, Doug. You talked about the ideal team running around 7 people. What happens when your team is in the hundreds? What do you do about that?
I would argue that's not a team. That's a group or a department or a division. So yeah, I mean, what any team researcher would say is that that's not a team, is the reality. So what I would recommend is figure out who your core group is. That is your dialogue, discussion, decision-making body, and kind of carve them out appropriately.
Okay. You spoke about paradoxes. And it's been very difficult in the near term, and will continue probably through the long term, given the uncertainty of so many things, to know when to pivot as a leader and as an organization. How do you figure out when to do that? Moving from a short-term uncertainty to something different, how do you figure that out?
I'm going to give not a cop-out answer, but the kind of the best answer anyone can have as a leader, which is you got to have a great team you can dialogue about this with, and sometimes some great external advisors as well. So if you've got your team and they're very strong, that's perfect. That's great. If you've got an executive coach, advisor, someone on the outside, if you've got other mentors on the outside, the only way you're going to really figure that out is through dialogue. Because I think we've all been there, right? Where we get into a stuck place about some topic in our mind, and we're stuck until we go out and we talk with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. And all of a sudden we just, you get this insight that what you were missing. And so you have to constantly be in that dialogue. I mean, when I was listening, I believe it was to Jamie Dimon maybe 6 months ago during a podcast, where he just said, the amount of people he forces himself to talk to on a daily basis has just increased exponentially every time he takes a more and more senior role, because you just don't have all that data. And what that does, having all those conversations, it develops your conviction. And I think that's really what this questioner is looking for, which is, how do I develop conviction in a world where none of the answers are quote unquote right? Mm-hmm. Right.
You spoke about process. On that topic, Doug, many of us tend to look at the outcome and then decide if we're happy with the process that led to it. I'll give you an example. When our top salesperson exceeds goal, we celebrate the act of selling, their intuition, if you will, as a salesperson. And the process of her approach is often an unsung hero. How do we refocus ourselves on process when outcomes are so tempting to look at, especially when they're so awesome?
Yeah, so what I would say is outcomes are. There's, it really is not an either or. Outcomes are critical. I think the important thing to keep in mind is that, and I think probably everyone on this call is pretty aware of this. If, going back to that Deming quote, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So that salesperson who just hits it out of the park, well, that person's going to retire, or that person's going to go somewhere else. And then all of a sudden, where's the organization? So the process is important to get down as best as you can. And then we always realize, hey, we put down the plan. Great quote from Charlie Parker. How did you become such a great trumpet player? He said, I practice. And then when I finally get on stage, I forget about everything I practice and I just let it wail. And so you could argue, oh, well, so when he gets on stage, he doesn't have a process, but there was a process building up to it. It's really the same thing in organizations. We process. And once we get to a certain point, we kind of forget about the process and we just let it wail. But it's the process that got us there. And that's the important thing that anyone, whether you're in sales or operations or executive management, I think will resonate with.
Absolutely. You touched on coaching earlier, Doug. Many leaders today are not known for being great coaches or mentors for that matter. Thinking about the next 10 years, how critical will it be for leaders to develop that capacity?
Oh, that's a great question. It is critical. It's becoming actually more and more prevalent. You'll see it in leadership development programs. It is, I believe, it's not just because I'm a coach, I believe really one of the most important skill sets, because what are we talking about? We're talking about an ability to bring out the best in other people is what we're talking about. And that's really what coaching is designed to do, whether it is sports coaching, whether it's executive coaching, that's what good coaching is designed to do. And what executive doesn't want to bring out the best in the team underneath them? Everyone. So you're figuring that out, whether it's, actually, and this has happened, getting some executives are actually taking the time to get certified as coaches, but I don't think that's necessary. Find in your organization or elsewhere a group who can bring you up to speed on some of the core principles of good coaching. And I think it will pay huge dividends in the future, critical as an individual and an organizational capability.
So workers say they want to work from home or have the flexibility to choose between home and office. And many company leaders, of course, are insisting on bringing everyone back like yesterday. So the question is really going to go not so much to the great office return, but matters of empathy and self-awareness and compassion. Have you noticed shifts among the leaders you've worked with, even over the last few months or a year, in a different direction from where their heads and hearts used to be? Or are they still kind of stubborn about that? What's your take?
I've noticed a shift.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how long is that going to last?
Right.
I think we've all spent the last 18 months staring at our own mortality in some way, shape, or form, which has kind of a softening effect on people. And what is it going to look like 24 months from now? That's, I think, really the big question. And if I were to give advice on the topic, I would say, remember, kind of use this moment as a touchstone as a leader, and realize that the value in really having that empathetic tone, that empathetic mindset that leads to then a set of empathetic practices is an advantage for the organization and how it operates on a day-to-day basis, because it feels very open and respectful. But it's also an advantage from a sustainability perspective of being able to attract talent. I've heard several stories of executives who've made the call, senior executives, to bring everyone back, and how it has had very successful candidates or high-level candidates pull themselves out of the running for those roles. Now, all that said, that empathy has to also take into consideration the value that the organization is trying to deliver. And I think what we all know on this call is being together in person does have tremendous value in delivering for customers, in connecting to each other. So I think if I were to choose one word that's so important, it's connection. And whether that means connection, I want everyone to stay home so you can connect with your family, so you can more and you can be able to deliver better for us. Or whether that means connection, I need everyone here in the office at certain points in time so we can connect with each other. Or connection, I need us out at client sites or together so we can deliver for clients. I think if we go back to the 3 outcomes that a leader must deliver on, the task outcome, the relationship, and the learning, that relationship outcome is what we're talking about here. And the connection should be the thing that the leader is best trying to achieve, whether that's at home, in the office, some form of hybrid.
All right, I'm going to take one more question, I think. Wait, do we have a chat? Maybe, let's see. Okay, maybe 2. Risk is, of course, a topic that you've written about extensively and so eloquently in your book and other articles. As we think about the future and leaders who are not really known for being, say, explorers and risk takers, what would you advise we start doing right now in the present regarding risk so that we can remain relevant and grow into the future?
So, yeah, so it's worth picking up. There's a lot on this topic. It's worth picking up, my book and taking a look if it's a topic you're interested in. I often think that risk aversion, it can be an individual thing. I'm risk averse. It can be an organizational thing. Certainly, people like Clayton Christensen wrote about it in The Innovator's Dilemma. It's been written about a lot over the past 25 years. But the thing you really want to get to is, I always talk about there's 2 risks. There's risks of acting, right? And going out on the limb. And that's what I always call the risk of kind of losing certainty, comfort, and control. And that's the short-term risks. What we have to balance that with is the long-term risks. And it's great to do this work with a team or with a group to figure out that's great. We don't want to take these risks because we don't want to risk certainty, control, and comfort in the short term. But what are we risking in the long term? Growth, progress, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of, if it's individual, just that I've done my best, that I've been all I could be. So those are risks we're taking. By not taking risks, we are risking the growth and progress that we know creates a successful organization and a meaningful life. Which isn't to say you should jump in and do them. It's to say that you need to do the balancing activity and action, my reflection, to think about, what am I willing to lose right now? And what am I willing to not lose right now? And no easy answers, but do the balanced reflection. And I think you often come to a place where you'll push yourself some. You're not going to do crazy stuff, but you're going to do more than maybe you would have done had you just been sitting there staring at the loss of certainty, comfort, and control and not wanting to feel it.
Great answer. All right, there is one more question, then we'll start to wrap it up. And it's an important one. So you touched on the importance of a mixed team, skill sets, experiences, diversity in all its shapes and forms. How do you know when you've, say, gone in one direction or the other? Specifically, can you have a team that's too diverse? Can that be counterproductive to the goals, mission, values of the organization?
It certainly can. There's obviously no easy answer to this question. It's going to be a personal assessment on each team. But what I would say is, the thing you're really looking for is, where are our potential blind spots? Where are the things where we feel as though we're not going to be able to have a productive opinion or a productive way of thinking about this moving forward? And then how do we get that? Sometimes it's through advisors. Maybe someone comes on the team, maybe they don't, maybe it's just an advisor. Sometimes it's adding to the team. And the one thing to check in on, so it's a hard question to answer. Every team's got to kind of wrestle with that themselves. But the one question to really ask yourself when you are looking at, have we gotten too diverse, is what is the impact when we're thinking it's maybe too diverse? There's too many differences of opinion. There's too many kind of different skill sets. And we're not able to actually come together and deliver on some of the core value for our customers, let's say. I think you have to ask yourself, where is it that I'm just not comfortable with a more complex, maybe slower, maybe more frustrating process, but that I think actually will provide a better product in the end or a better delivery in the end? And where is it that it's actually negatively impacting delivery? That's a really tough place that teams have to wrestle with. How do we feel that discomfort with bringing someone more junior on, but we know it's critical for the future for some reason, and at the same time feel okay with it, but that if it's really damaging our ability to deliver, we're able to make that call. Tough stuff, as you said, really tough stuff. But that's where that team dialogue process, you go through those 5 elements of productive dialogue, there's no topic more critical to really perfect moving over the right side of that continuum than this topic.
Yeah, it was a tough question, but I think you handled it pretty well. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start to wrap this up. Doug, thank you for making time for sharing your insight. Thank you all for tuning in. Many of you did. I really appreciate that. And as always, thank you for your marvelous questions. I learned so much just by getting to ask them. Without any final thoughts, Doug, before we officially wrap up today's session?
No, I appreciate everyone taking time to taking time with me as we in the middle of a Thursday. Best of luck to all of you who are leading organizations. Best of luck to those of you who are out looking for jobs. It's an interesting market filled with opportunities, and always look forward to chatting in the future if I can be useful.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, everyone, Doug will be back in October with a very different presentation. Yeah, it's a teaser. So look forward to that invitation from me. And with that, thank you all. Thank you, Doug. I look forward to seeing you at the next session of ExecuNet Masterclass. Bye for now.